one of the most interesting, one of the most interesting. Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a crowdsourced, a list that you all helped me make about the best historical fiction of all time. Now I'm really questioning myself, probably because I'm a little daunted by the amount of books that were submitted. And I am wondering, is this the best idea of all time or is this the worst idea of all time? We'll get into how I'm going to execute this in the meat of the video, but just know I am talking about books that you all said were the tip of the iceberg, the best of the best, the creme de la creme, the pièce de résistance of historical fiction. I said, give me one, the best, according to you. What is your number one historical fiction of all time? And y'all really showed up. So partly I'm daunted because y'all showed up so well, which I'm so happy for, honestly. And also there's just a lot of books to talk about. So I just, I just need to get started and get the ball rolling on this video. But if you're new here, then hi, I'm Shelly. I really love books and reading. I love a list. And I have created this list. Well, I didn't create it. Y'all submitted your favorite historical fiction, like what you consider the best historical fiction of all time, to me, and I put it in a list, and I'm going to talk about that list with you today. So if you're new and you're enjoying the vibe, I would encourage you to subscribe, like the video, that's always going to help. And without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. I think I have anywhere between 50 and 60 books to talk about in this list, which is wonderful. However, I don't want to sit in this seat for 60 books worth of talking. So I think I'm going to sit in different places of my house as I progress. So this first iteration of this beginning part of the list is going to be me putting on makeup. And then I'll kind of just take you through different parts as I maybe drink some coffee or sit in my sitting room or hang out with my boys, and I'll be talking about the list as I go on, just to help kind of keep me, just to keep things moving on the channel. But this first part, I'm going to be putting on makeup while I do this. Taking you through my day, that is the first order of business. The second order of business is that the list is lightly edited. If you want the raw data of the list, you will have to go to that original video and look at the comments. Some people submitted their book recommendations to me on Voxer. Some people had emailed me. Some people, there was just a lot of different ways that people were reaching out. And so I tried to compile the list as best I can with a little bit of editing, primarily books that didn't really count as historical fiction, but just know that this list is very lightly edited, and I got a bunch of recommendations from a couple of different sources. But if you want the raw books, like if you're like, I want to just look at the original data, then the comments of the video, that original video, is going to be the best place for it. Okay, I think I'm just avoiding things, so let's go ahead and get into this list. We are starting in strong with Kate Atkinson's Life After Life. I really like Kate Atkinson as an author. I have this book on Kindle, but I haven't read it yet. And this is going to be following the multiple lives. So it's magical realism or magic meets historical fiction, the multiple lives of Ursula. And so we are following this person who is experiencing a much longer life than any single person could possibly live. Although I know that a chunk of the book is set during World War II, but the premise is this sort of, rebirth of the same person over and over again. I've not read it. I've heard good things about it. I've heard that it either really, really, really works for some people, or there is like a twist in the book that some people don't really like. But this was like Kate Atkinson's big literary work that everybody seemed to have read at the time, and that is just the pièce de résistance for a lot of people. Next is The Chronicle of Kings by Lynn Austen. Now, this is retellings of Bible stories, obviously in a different way, and it's going to be following the kings of Judah. I have seen this series. Like, I feel like I could draw a cover of this series, but I've not yet read it. Next up is Be Like a Fox by Erica Brenner. This is going to be a fictional biography of Machiavelli, which has me very interested in it. It sounds like it would be a really fun project to read Machiavelli's The Prince and then also pair that with Be Like a Fox by Erica Brenner. The first book I've read on this list is The War That Saved My Life by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. Now, this is set during World War II. We're following a young girl named Ada. This is actually a middle grade, I think technically a middle grade novel. Ada was born with a club foot, and she ends up in the book seeking refuge to the countryside of England. I read this some years ago. I really enjoyed it, and it won the Newbery Prize, which is a middle grade or kind of like a grade school fiction award back in 2016. In that video where I asked you for these recommendations, there was this real sense of camaraderie because somebody would say, this is my favorite, and then somebody would come around and second it, and that's what happened with this book. So it's Geraldine Brooks's March, which won the Pulitzer back in 2006. Geraldine Brooks, I just read my first book by her. I have not read March, but I read, it's right over here, Year of Wonders, which is about a year with the plague, set in this very small rural town. And immediately what I could tell was that Geraldine Brooks is an incredibly vivid and talented writer. So when another book by Geraldine Brooks showed up on this list, it got me all like excited. Like my bookish spidey senses all of a sudden were perked up. And March is going to be telling the story of the father, the Mr. March, the father of Little Women, because in Little Women, by Louis May Alcott, we follow the women and the young girls and the March family through the children's perspective and the mother and what it was like to be waiting for her father. But Geraldine Brooks flips that on its head, and instead we're following Mr. March. This is like at the tippy top of books that I want to buy, but I haven't yet. And it sounds like a really fantastic story, if not a little bit difficult in terms of content. Possession by A.S. Byatt is next on this list, and Possession is a feat. The book itself is a feat because it is about two academics following and like trying to uncover in a very academic way the love story of two people that happened, and it happened in like the Victorian era. So you're following both these academics while they're trying to uncover the love story that happened, several decades ago. And the interesting thing is that as they're like sifting through material, you're getting short stories and poetry and letters. And Byatt somehow creates this whole world that feels very spot on, very Victorian, but also tells a story about like the Victorian people. It's like told in the style of a Victorian author, Victorian poetry, Victorian letters, all to uncover the love story of two Victorians. And it all kind of comes together in this like investigative yet love story-y way. Again, a feat of writing for sure. Even though I did not love this book, I can definitely appreciate what it was doing and what Byatt was able to achieve. It actually won the Booker back in 1990, as it well should have. Another magical meets historical entry on this list, which is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Suzanna Clarke. And this is going to be set in a very alternative, magical kind of England back in the 19th century. And they're it's sort of like academics exploring magic. I actually watched the show of this book, and my husband Ted read this book and he liked it, but he was sorely disappointed because he thought that this was the first book in a series. Or he thought that the book was going to offer more than what the television show had captured, and they end at the same point. And so he finished the book and was like, what? She's only written one book? She hasn't even written a second book? And so he was like very, not upset, but he was like sort of shocked by it because we both really loved the television show. And so I've always wanted to read the book. We have it on the Kindle. It's there for me to read. I just haven't dove in with interest yet, although I've read the beginning like 5 times. It's one of those books that if I don't know what I want to read, sometimes I'll pick it up and start to read it just to maybe fall asleep or just to get a little taste of the book, but I haven't actually like dedicated myself to the reading of this book. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell won a bunch of fantasy awards. So it won the Hugo Award in 2005, and also it won in 2005 the World Fantasy Award. I'm not surprised to see James Clavell on the list. James Clavell is most noted for his book Shogun. I mean, it's getting it's getting life again for like the second or third or fourth time because of the show Shogun that's now out. Now, Shogun wasn't what was submitted. Instead, Tai-Pan was submitted, and it's doing exactly what Clavell does best, which is Westerners in an Eastern setting and learning about the Eastern world, which is what Tai-Pan is essentially about, set in 19th century Hong Kong. This next book won the Goodreads Choice Awards in 2018 in the category of historical fiction. Gosh, that was a tongue twister. And it is Next Year in Havana by Chanel Cleeton. This has a dual timeline set in Cuba in 1958 and 2017, following a granddaughter, the 2017 timeline, and the grandmother, the 1958 timeline. And it's investigating the political turmoil at that time. Next is a book that I've never heard of, which is one of the reasons why I love getting recommendations from you all. And it is Prayers for the Stolen by Jennifer Clement. Now, this is going to be set in rural Mexico following a young woman who is smart and funny and fierce, and she is in the world with other women who are trying to survive. It sounds like there are a lot of twists and turns and action, and there is even, there's a bunch of things like the shadow of a drug war. Bodies turn up on the outskirts of a village as they are trying to live among scorpions and snakes. It sounds like a harrowing and wonderful tale with an awesome heroine at the center of it all. Of course, we have to have some Saxons and Vikings, and by none other, the author is none other than the Bernard my gosh, you could say Bernard a lot of different ways. I'm so sorry, y'all. Bernard Cornwell. Bernard Cornwell. Oh my gosh. Stop it. The Last Kingdom series is what was submitted. And so we're going to be in the 9th century England. We're following Saxon noblemen and Vikings, and it's going to be this thrilling and exciting tale, as I've heard that Bernard Cornwell has done with all of his writings. I often am wondering, where do I start with Bernard Cornwell? And I was like, I should start with The Last Kingdom. That's where I should start. Next is a book that I've read, and it is The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. And this is indeed a really, really, really good book. It follows Dinah from the Bible. We're in biblical times. It's one of Jacob's daughters, and it follows her life. And my goodness, it is a secular retelling of a Bible story, but it's so good. It's so interesting. The Red Tent references women who are having their time of the month and how they are sent to the outskirts of the village, I believe. I think that it's the outskirts of the village. They're separating themselves because they are unclean at that time, and it's about the female bond, and really, it was really good. I remember really, really liking it. It won the Jewish Book Award back in 1997. Next up is an author that I feel like I should know more about, but I don't. I don't even know the gender of this author, and it's E.L. Doctorow, and maybe their initials is to sort of keep their gender ambiguous. I don't know. But anyways, it's Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow. Now, if you can imagine, it's going to be about ragtime. We're following 3 families in the early part of the 20th century in America. And it's going to be putting those 3 family stories together in a saga, apparently. This won the National Book Critics Circle Award back in 1975. I didn't even know that Doctorow was writing in 1975. I literally know nothing about this author, and I feel like that should change. Another Pulitzer Prize for fiction. This book won back in 2015, and it is a book that I'm kind of shocked I haven't read. just one of those books on my mental TBR, don't even own it. It is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Now, this is going to be set during World War II, another World War II book. And it's going to be, we're going to be in France, that's occupied by Germany, following a blind French girl and a young German boy as their lives intersect during this time. It sounds like the perfect setup for an incredible book. I just haven't read it yet. Another book I have read, I feel like a round of applause for me when I don't, sometimes I get chuffed when I have read a book, on this list. And anyways, it's The Wonder by Emma Donoghue. Now, this is going to be following an English nurse, and we're set in the 19th century in Ireland. This nurse is asked to watch a young girl who apparently has been living without food for a very long time. And so it's this question of like, is it spiritual? Like, is she living because God is allowing her to live without food and she is this like immaculate spiritual being, or is she a fraud? And the nurse is part of that investigation. It's a really compelling book, perfectly wrapped up. One of those that has an awesome ending as well as just a really intriguing premise and great plotting throughout. I really, really enjoyed this book. The next book is The Game of Thrones for historical fiction, and it is The Iron King by Maurice Druon. I heard this is like the OG Game of Thrones, but make it less fantasy and more historical. So this is a 14th century France, and we are following in the first book the Iron King, and it's going to be chronicling the downfall of the French King Philip IV and all of the political intrigue that follows. I heard that it is very Game of Thronesy, like lots of twists and turns and fighting and lots of characters. That's what I've heard. But I was like, I have not heard of this series in particular. I did not like Game of Thrones, but like, I'm like, maybe I'll like the historical version of it by this Maurice Druon author. Maybe. The next book is a book that I own and I want to get to sooner, really, honestly, very much. Like, I want to get to it this year because like, I just want to know what it's all about. And it's by the beloved author, Dorothy Dunnett. And she has, it's called The Game of Kings. I think that's the first book in the series. It's a 5 or 6 book series where it's set in 16th century Scotland following, Francis Crawford of Le Monde as he's trying to clear his name of treason. I heard that those who love Dorothy Dunnett get this like sparkly joy in their eyes when somebody really loves something from the depths of their heart, that she is a beloved author, which makes sense that she was put twice on this list. Somebody else submitted the next book, which is also by Dorothy Dunnett, and it's King Hereafter, which is going to be a retelling of Macbeth set in 11th century Scotland and Scandinavia. And this one is a standalone versus a series. Next is a book that I've wanted to read and I've passed up on buying a couple of times. I feel ashamed of saying that. But it is Romola by George Elliot. Now, this is one of her only historical fiction novels, and it is set in the 15th century France, following a young woman trying to navigate the political and personal challenges of the Italian Renaissance, y'all. That sounds like a Shelley book, y'all. That sounds like a Shelley book. And George Eliot is a master writer. I mean, she's so brilliant. So part of me is like, again, that sort of Spidey book senses where I'm like, I want that in my life right now. This list would not be complete without an Umberto Eco book, and it is the Umberto Ecos of all the Umberto Ecos. That it's like the pièce de résistance of all the Umberto Eco books, at least in the public consciousness, and it is The Name of the Rose, which is a 14th century Italian murder mystery, I think with monks. That, from what I know, that's what it is. Next up is another book that I own, and it's also another World War II book, and it's going to be The Gift of Rain by Tan Tuan Ang, and it's following a young man in Malaysia during that time period, and he's struggling through loyalty and betrayal. It sounds good. Sounds kind of like a Shelley book. Next up is one of my favorite series of all time, and it is the Neapolitan series. Now, I've not finished this book series yet, but I do love it. And this is by Elena Ferrante. This is a 4-part series set in Naples, and it's really about the friendship and the ups and downs of the friendship between two women. And following their friendship is harrowing and emotional and just, I don't know, just wonderful. It's also an Italian novel translated from Italian into English, and it's really good. It holds a special place in my heart, and I really need to finish the series. Another book that's been recommended to me multiple times, and I really need to get to it. I actually own it on Kindle, and it's just one of those books that I forget that I own kind of thing. And it is Cold Mountain by Charles Fraser. This is set during the American Civil War, and it's following a Confederate soldier's journey home and his being reunited with loved ones amidst war-torn America. This won the National Book Award for Fiction back in 1997, and it has been recommended to me countless times. Next up is a book that was submitted multiple times. Like, so many people came around and were like, this was amazing. It's actually my aunt's favorite book series of all time, and I love my aunt. And it's Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. This is following, we're in 12th century England. It's an epic novel. I think it's a trilogy, and we're following the construction of a cathedral. We're following a ton of different characters. It's one of those books that I've wanted to read for a long time, partly because of my aunt, but also because a lot of people have told me that I would really enjoy it. Next is another set of books. It's a series. I have the whole bind up, and it's the Forsyth Saga by John Galsworthy. Now, John Galsworthy won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I'm sure this was part of the body of work that helped him win it. And he won that back in 1932. But it's set in late 19th century, early 20th century England, and this series follows the wealthy Forsyth family as they navigate power and love and social changes amidst the Victorian and Edwardian era, which sounds like it's right there up my alley, and I don't know why I keep avoiding it. It sounds like another Shelley book. It sounds so good, and I own it. My excuses are running thin. The next book I just read the synopsis for, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm just going to read the synopsis. But it is The Reliable Wife by Robert Goldrick, another book that I've never even heard of. And it is set in 1907, Wisconsin. It's like, okay. And it revolves around a wealthy man who advertises for a reliable wife, but finds himself entangled in secrets and desires with the woman who responds to this advertisement. Yes, please. I want to go and buy this tomorrow. This is amazing. It's supposed to be dark and atmospheric and have a psychological depth. Oh my gosh. Okay. I want to read this tomorrow. This sounds so good. Now, some people submitted just an author, all of her books. And so one of the authors that was submitted sort of without any specific titles in mind. And it is Philippa Gregory. And so Philippa Gregory, oh my goodness, we're back to Bernard. Okay, Philippa Gregory she writes about the Plantagenet and Tudor period. She was most known, what kicked off her literary career, what set her literary career on fire, and I don't need to even tell you all, but I'll just remind myself. And it was The Other Boleyn Girl, which follows Anne Boleyn's sister, Mary Boleyn, as she is sort of telling the story of what her family went through, what she went through, what her family went through and sacrificed, and all of that with King Henry VIII, who's so moody and changes his mind all the time. I mean, it's a great story about both siblings, love, loss, desire, and it's wonderful. It's a great book. Spicy, just the right amount of spice. So Philippa Gregory, that's kind of her niche. So if you're really into the Tudors and Plantagenets, if you are wanting to know more about King Henry VIII and his wives, then this is the series. Her books are definitely for you. Heading back to the American South, we have The Kitchen House. Now, The Kitchen House was submitted multiple times. So many people were saying that this is such a great book. It's by Kathleen Grissom. We are set in the antebellum South, and we are going to be on a Virginia plantation following slaves and indentured servants through this time period. It sounds really good. It's one of those books that I think the publicity for it wasn't the most splashy, and yet the reader reception came out and made the book what it became, which was like really lauded and a super enjoyable read. I remember working at the library and people coming back and returning the Kitchen House and being like, this was amazing. And I was like, oh, okay. I am going to go do my hair with a big mirror, get dressed, and then we'll continue our saga with this list, hopefully in a different setting.
Get it, bean station.
No, look at yourself.
Gaga.
We're working with natural light here, natural light. Okay, next up is The Foundling by Stacey Halls, and this is set in 18th century London, where a woman gives up her child to the Foundling Hospital, only to come back 6 years later to find out what happened to said child. And of course, it's kind of like unraveling a mystery, and the plot takes off from there. Next up is Manga Kingdom by Yasuhisa Hara, and it's a historical manga series set in China during the Warring States period. It's supposed to be quite epic in scale. The sun is definitely going in and out of the clouds. So next up is The Mercies by Karen Millwood Hargrave. This is going to be about a small Norwegian town in the 17th century based on the 1621 witch trials in that area, and it's going to be based also off of an epic storm where a lot of the men were killed, and we're going to be following the stories of the women of the town as they have to fend for themselves after the death of their men. I think this sounds like a Shelley book. Do you guys see this? Do you see what I have to put up with? We went from The Foundling to The Founding by Cynthia Herod Eagles. This is a 35-book series, and I did look for the first one while I was at a bookstore recently, and they didn't have the first book, but I was like, a 35-book series, now that is some dedication. And this, it starts in 1914, and it spans the entire 20th century, and it's about the Moreland family, and so you're going to go through the major historical events, and I'm sure some family drama throughout. Next up is a book that I'm actually reading right now, and it is the Wolf Den trilogy by Elodie Harper. This is going to be, we're in Pompeii in 74 AD, following the women of a brothel. Now I'm doing the first book in the series, which is called Wolf Den, and I don't know, it's intriguing me thus far. You see my little ones having a great time back there. I hope you're enjoying. Next up is Act of Oblivion by Robert Harris. Two people actually nominated this book and this author. So this is post-World War II England, and we're exploring the moral dilemmas of war through the eyes of a government minister. So, sounds great. I think I'm supposed to be reading a Robert Harris book this year, but I can't really remember. I don't know for sure. This book I'm going to have to order off of thrift books because I really don't think I'm going to see it out in the wild. But it is called In a Dark Wood Wandering by Hella Hasse. And it is going to be set in the 14th century in France. And we're going to be following the life of Charles d'Orléans. You know what? He's a prince and a poet, and we're going to be following the chronicle of his life, his life and the events in 14th century France. Gosh, I wish I could speak about it more eloquently, but this has been recommended to me by the same person a couple of times, and I don't know, it sounds really good. I mean, who are we kidding? All of the books sound good. We are back in America with the Revolutionary War with The Book of Negroes by Lawrence Hill. Now, this is set in 18th century, and we're following a woman who was kidnapped and then sold into slavery in South Carolina, which just tickles my fancy. Yes?
Can I?
No. I like that it's set in South Carolina. That's where I'm currently at, and set during the American Revolution. And I like that it is a woman's journey. Anyways, this was a Commonwealth. This won the Commonwealth's Writers' Prize. Commonwealth Writers' Prize. back in 2008. Next up is a book that kind of sounds like the Follett book that I mentioned previously, and this is Cathedral by Ben Hopkins. This is going to be set in the 13th century in Europe, and it's going to be following the construction of a fictional cathedral and all of the people involved and the religious and political turmoils. It sounds kind of cool, and I feel like for fans of Follett, you might also like this book, Cathedral by Ben Hopkins. Yellow Wife by Shadekwa Johnson. This is going to be following the story of an enslaved woman who is promised her freedom on her 18th birthday, but of course that doesn't come, and it's going to be chronicling her journey as she's enslaved to a very brutal man who owns one of the most infamous slave jails in Virginia. From an author I feel like I should have read by now, but I haven't, and it is going to be The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. This is going to be a reimagining of the story of Jesus if he had a wife. Another South Carolina book on the list. I feel so special. So the next up is, and it's another Sue Monk Kidd book, The Invention of Wings, set in 19th century Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston is just a few hours away. We are following a young abolitionist woman who is given the gift of a slave, and it's going to be the navigating of that relationship and, thinking about race and gender and social justice while trying to strive for freedom and empowerment during this time period. This won the historical fiction Goodreads Choice Awards for historical fiction back in 2014. One of the most interesting selections in this list is a single poem. I will give you the link to read it for yourself. I'll link that down below. And it's called Once Upon a Time There Was a Man. And it is by Mark Hammond. Next is Byzantine by Stephen R. Lawhead. This is going to be set in 9th century Constantinople, and we're following an Irish monk who is encountering political intrigue in a spiritual journey. I don't know, but whenever anybody mentions the Byzantine Empire, I'm like, that sounds like something I would enjoy. Yeah?
No.
No. Ooh, based on the first female detective in the United States, someone who infiltrates the Confederate Army to uncover a deadly conspiracy. Wow. Okay, but I didn't see the title. Hopefully the book is up. Girl in Disguise by Greer McAllister. Oh my gosh, I want to buy this tomorrow. This sounds amazing. First female detective set during the American Civil War. That sounds amazing. Next up is a story of women telling stories to one another, and it's called For Thy Great Pain, Have Mercy on My Little Pain, and it's by Victoria Mackenzie. So it's set in 1413 in Norwich. Well, they meet for the first time in the city of Norwich, rather. The first woman has left her 14 children and husband to make a journey for herself. Her husband is abusive and she has visions of Christ. The second woman, Julian, has her own visions. So we have two women, visionaries, visionists, that meet up and tell stories of one another, both about girlhood, motherhood, loss, love, and all of that. And I'm sure a spiritual journey as well. So yes, I love the cover of this book, by the way. Next up is Company of Liars by Karen Maitland. This is going to be like a reinterpretation, retelling of Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, in which we are set during the Black Plague era in history, and these group of travelers are come together trying to outrun death. We finally get to the Hilary Mantel portion of this list. There's the book that I submitted, and I confessed to you all in that video, and it was Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy, like the first book, and the entire trilogy is amazing, in which she chronicles the part of the life, more of the political life of Thomas Cromwell, and makes him a man that one truly roots for. This is during Tudor times in England. And then a lot of you were like, that would have been my choice as well, is Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. And so other people submitted something, since I had already said that to me is the best of the best. And so someone else mentioned that Flood by Hilary Mantel is really, really good. It's one of the few Mantel books that I don't own. And so it's set in 1950s England, and it tells the story of a mysterious stranger who arrives in a convent and is supposed to have some miracle powers. Next up is one of the most brutal books that is supposedly ever written, and it is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Yes! And it's set in mid-19th century America that follows a young runaway kid who joins a scalp hunting expedition. Scalp hunting, and follows the enigmatic figure of Judge Holden. Atonement by Ian McEwan is next. Why did I think that this would be a good idea? Do you hear them? Atonement by Ian McEwan, set World War II. We're back at World War II. We're in England. It's about a young girl's false accusations against her sister's lover and the impact of war on their lives. It's supposed to be complex. And it also won the Booker back in 2001. Am I just hiding from my own children? Yes, I am. Okay, so we're going to keep this moving. Next is a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. A lot of you gave this a thumbs up. You all were like, yes, amazing, best historical fiction. Not that surprised, because it is Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. It is a stellar book. Why is the light changing on me? It is a stellar book. It is following a whole bunch of rangers, like cowboys, as they go from one side of the United States north to get some cattle, I think, up there. The cast of characters is unforgettable. The scenes are harrowing, because it is really man versus nature to the extreme. It is the only Western I think I've ever read, and I really, really enjoyed it. I've really tried to, in some ways, avoid saying who submitted what, because I have so many fond feelings for people who submitted things to this list. It just, it really means a lot to me. And but this next person that submitted something, I adore her, because Starla is amazing. Starla comments on pretty much every one of my videos, and so when I saw her submit something, I was like, yes. And it shot up to the very top of my list. So she submitted The Heretic Queen by Michelle Moran, and this is set in Egypt. It's following the raising of a young princess, Queen Nefertari, and who ends up being one of Egypt's most powerful queens. So it's following her growing up period. This next book is growing as a booktube darling. People who read it seem to love it, and it is Cuddy by Benjamin Myers. I know that this text is slightly experimental, playing around with at least text size from what I know. But this is going to be set in 18th century Yorkshire, and it's going to be following a hermit or a solitary farmer living a life of isolation and survival, which sounds so much like a Shelley book. I love books like that, like Alone in Nature, exploring what that would be like, what that would feel like. So I've been told many times that this book would be for me, and now I'm really starting to believe it, especially as the premise starts to take root in my heart. Next up is the Master and Commander series, the Patrick O'Brian, Jack Aubrey novels. This is set during the Napoleonic Wars. We're on a ship, and I believe we see someone who rises in the ranks of the ship over several novels. There's a ton. There are a ton of books in this series. I think 16 or 17, don't quote me on that, but Patrick O'Brien's and Jack Aubrey novels are well loved, and I think are a classic of the historical fiction genre, and are continued to be read today. I just bought that first book super recently. I did not move to the side, so who knows where these pictures are showing up. Okay, I've properly moved to the side. I feel like my children are going to find me at any minute. Who knows? Okay, now 2 books by Maggie O'Farrell. The first one is Hamnet, which is a reimagining of what Hamlet's life would have looked like from the perspective of not Hamlet himself. I heard that it, talks about like themes of grief and the carrying of grief. So that's the first Maggie O'Farrell book. I have not read Hamnet, even though I've been told multiple times that I would love it. The next one is The Mayor's Portrait, which is the only Maggie O'Farrell book that I've read. And it is going to follow, it's in 16th century Florence, set in 16th century Florence, following the Duchess of Ferrara. And it's off of the portress of the Duchess of Ferrara, and the poem, the Browning poem, My Last Duchess. And the poem starts with My Last Duchess on the Wall. And it's this imagining of the poem sort of indicates that this duchess might have been murdered by her husband for various reasons. And it's sort of taking and fictionalizing that poem. A book that I almost bought about a week ago. And it is called My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk. This is a murder mystery set in 16th century Istanbul. This won the International Dublin Literary Award back in 2003. A book whose premise sounds very much like Susanna Clarke's The Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and this is called The Declaration of the Rights of Magicians. So this sounds like it's historical meets magical. It's going to be set in an alternative 18th century Europe where magic is real, and we're going to be thinking about the themes of freedom and equality. Sticking with the magical vein, this is going to be Kayeke by Vaishnavi Patel. This is set in India. It's kind of reminds me a bit of like a Madeline, in the vein of Madeline Miller's Circe. So instead, it's going to be talking about Queen Kayeke in the epic, which I'm not familiar with, Ramayana. And it's going to give her a voice as she defies like the gods and those around her who have an opinion about where her life will lead. We have one of those authors who is just like, somebody just submitted the author name, and it's Jean Pleiade. Now, she's also known as Eleanor Alice Burnford. She had a couple of pen names, I think, and she's most known for her historical romances. And a little bit of like light mysteries, mystery romance novels. She wrote about Eleanor of Aquitaine and Mary, Queen of Scots. That vein among her many, many novels. Myth enters our list once again with The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. This is set in during Victorian England, and our main protagonist is relieved. I think it starts with her leaving her abusive husband and moving to a much rural and more rural and much quieter small town than where she is from, and yet she is being haunted by a mythical serpent. Next up is Sun and Splendor by Sharon K. Penman. This is a love letter to Richard III during the War of the Roses period in England, and I heard it is phenomenal. I forgot to mention actually a book that I think I forgot to actually type it in, but I'll mention it here. And my sweet friend Anita, who is one of the dearest friends I know and that I talk to about all things bookish and life, she also said MMK, The Far Pavilions, which is an epic romance set in India, and it's supposed to be quite sweeping and just phenomenal, like a phenomenal read. Next up is True Grit by Charles Portis, which is a Western. Another Western enters our list, and we're following a young girl trying to seek justice for her father. And as the title would suggest, I've heard it's quite gritty, but also beautifully written. Maybe I'm really into mysteries right now because some of the books that are most getting me excited are the ones with political intrigue and espionage. And that's what this next book has. And it is A Shadow in Moscow by Catherine Ray. And we're going to be in Russia during Stalin's regime, following a young woman who gets herself entangled with espionage and political intrigue while she's searching for her missing brother. I almost bought this next book as well, and it is All Quiet on the Western Frontier by Eric Maria Marquet. This is going to be giving us the experience of the German soldiers in World War I. It's supposed to have a very anti-war message, beautifully written, one of those books that really sheds a light on what happened in World War I and the experiences of that time period. But it also won the Pulitzer in 1929. So I'm intrigued. I'm kind of surprised that I passed it up now. All of these books sound good. I think you all know me really well. So, oh, and it's also from Starla, my sweet subscriber. And she said Godiva, which is the Viking Saga by David Rose. It's 11th century England, and it retells the legend of Lady Godiva, focusing on her defiance of Norman rule and her efforts to protect her people from oppression. A Viking era English typeset novel. Oh my gosh, I'm starting to get articulate. Maybe I need a little break. We're gonna keep going forward, but that sounds good. Doesn't that sound good? Does that not sound so good? Next is The Forest by Edward Rutherford. We are following an imaginary mythical forest that we follow through the years. As far as I know, Rutherford writes quite large novels, they're big and they're also epic in scale, and so we're going to be following from the perspective of this forest time, as time passes. So an interesting and intriguing premise. I got this harebrained idea to make a wild thumbnail, and so I moved a whole bunch of my books around and decided to sit among them. This stack is actually leaning against this bookcase. So we have made it to the Painter to the King by Amy Sackville. This is set in the 1700s in Spain, and it explores the relationship between Diego, oh man, I didn't scoot over. Okay, I'll finish this one. Diego Velázquez and King Philip IV, and it talks about art, power, and creativity. I love art and history together. And so I'm moving as I'm talking about it because I cannot stand. And then we have this tilted, y'all. I know that's going to drive some of you who like everything really perfect and straight. It's going to drive you nuts. So I'm sorry ahead of time for that. But yeah, I like things that have to do with art and such. Art things. Back When You Called Us the Devils by Takashi Sano. This is going to be back in World War II, or that's where we are in this novel, and it's going to be exploring Japanese internment camps in the U.S. during that time, and that's a fascinating topic that I don't think it's written about much. Next up is Boudica, and I'm laughing because I just watched The Brothers Gwynn, which is John Gwynn's sons, I believe, who have done a myriad of videos about historical fiction, and Boudica is huge, at the tippity top of their list. This is by Manda Scott, and it's supposed to, they said in that video, and according to my notes, that it is about the Roman occupation, ancient Britain during the Roman occupation, okay? And it's about the Celtic queen Boudica, and they said that the civilization and the world building was just spectacular, and the way that they were talking about it, just the way anyone talks about something that they love really excitedly, it gets you, it sweeps you in, it makes you want to pick it up. And so here they both were it was the number 2 of their favorite historical fiction novels of all time, both of the young men, and I was like, oh, that sounds so good. Of course they didn't comment on my video, not that they had to, but now seeing Boudica again on this list, I'm like, oh, it has a whole new context based on that video that I saw this morning. Then I also have Antonio Scarati's M, Son of the Century, which is one of my favorite historical fiction novels. It's going to be talking about the way Mussolini came to power. It's supposed to be the first part in a 4-part series. And it's in some ways it's a fictionalization of Benito Mussolini and the way he starts to acquire power in the political landscape of Italy during that time, but also it has nonfiction excerpts embedded in, and it's so good. It's such a good reading experience, and I was so glad when somebody had submitted it so I could talk about it in this list as well. A World War II refugee story, The Salt of the Sea by Ruth Sepetys. I think that's how you say her name. This won the Carnegie Medal. I've never read anything by Sepetys, and I know that she is hugely popular among people who love historical fiction. I just have yet to read her. I know that I've made a lot of comments about when World War II books pop up, but there's actually been a lot of submissions about books that are influenced by the Napoleonic Wars, and Desiree by Anne-Marie Selenko is another Napoleonic War influenced book. This tells the story of Desiree, who becomes Queen of Sweden, and her first-hand accounts, this fictionalized events of the first-hand accounts during the Napoleonic Wars, and it's supposed to be her life, the rising of power and the way that she deals with this tumultuous time. Next up is a book that I just finished, Catherine by Anya Seton. This is about Catherine and the Duke of Lancaster, who were always destined to be together, even though their road to getting there is really tumultuous. A really awesome book, very richly detailed, and also talks about the ups and downs of England during their time, during Catherine's life. The next is The Terror by Dan Simmons, which is about an Arctic expedition gone wrong. Again, it's going to be one of those, man against the elements kind of thing, a really harsh environment. We have two novels by John Steinbeck, who tends to set his writing in the Central Valley of California, or the central parts in California. So the first one is Cannery Row, which is going to be set during the Great Depression in Monterey. I've actually been to Cannery Row, and it's going to have colorful characters during a really tumultuous time. And then the next is a family saga, The East of Eden, set in the Salinas Valley. I've not read this, and it talks about two families and their years together, sort of struggling against one another. There are themes of good and evil and freedom, and of course a lot of humanity embedded in. Another book that I have read, and it is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This is, again, a Napoleonic War book set in Russia, both talking about the sort of upper crust of society and their views on war, while also getting into the action of getting it on the ground where the fighting is. He writes about both, and he has a lot of contemplations about history and who gets to write history, which is a fascinating component to the novel itself. Several people loved this next book. So many people mentioned it, and there was a ton of thumbs up. It made me think that I was really missing out on something. And it was actually A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, which is going to follow Count Alexander Rostov, who is sentenced to house arrest in a Moscow hotel. And from what I know, he's actually stuck in that hotel, and the whole plot kind of takes place during that time. I think it's probably a really thoughtful book. I have not read it. I feel like you could almost find this anywhere, at any Goodwill or at any thrift store, and find a copy of it because it is that popular. I just didn't realize it was that well loved. Kidnapping, Pirates, and Slavery bring us to our next novel, which is My Name is Resolute by Nancy Turner, and it's going to be set in America during the Revolutionary War. Another Nobel Prize laureate, and it is Kristin Lavranth-Datter. I only know how to say that because I talked to some really good friends of mine as they were reading this novel, and it is the Sigrid Undset. Oh my gosh. He's a Norwegian author, and it's set in Norway, and it is about this incredible main character. I've also heard that Kristin Lavranth-Datter is one of the best protagonists of all time, and it obviously navigates what you would imagine it would navigate: love, life, family, faith, personal desires versus the pull of societal expectations. But yeah, I was surprised to see this on the list, and then I was like, I know that novel. I remember when my friends were reading it, and then I didn't. And then, yeah, but they both said it was really good. It was really, really entertaining. And so seeing it on the list has renewed my spirits in the fact that I do want to read it. Mila 18 is our next novel by Leon Uris, and it is a Holocaust novel set in Nazi-occupied Warsaw, and it's going to be talking about Jewish resilience fighters in this Warsaw ghetto trying to defy the Nazis and fight back, which sounds incredible. A time traveler novel, and it's even in the title, and it's the Traveler in Time by Alison Utley. This was the person that commented said that this was a childhood favorite, so I think it's for a younger audience, just to be aware of that. This is set in the 20th century England, but follows a young girl who realizes that she can go back in time, and so she goes to the 16th century to Queen Elizabeth I. Another Egyptian novel, and it's called The Egyptian by Mika Belardi. This is following a physician who has very humble beginnings and rises in the ranks in Egyptian society. Two Sarah Waters novels. The first one is Fingersmith, which is going to be set in Victorian England. From what I know about Fingersmith, it is very thriller-esque, very, very thriller-esque. And then also there's The Little Stranger, which is going to be set during World War II. I don't want to read actually too much about it. I have their synopses up, but I don't want to read them because I know with Sarah Waters, it's really best to go in blind with most of her work. I remember when this next novel was so big, and it was like the it novel when I was working at the library. It is codenamed Verity by Elizabeth Wen. It is set during World War II and mostly about two best friends and what to do when conflict. I think it's a pilot, they say. A pilot is captured by the Nazis and the friendship is put to its test. Not the friendship between the pilot and the girls, but between the best friends. That's put to the test. We're sticking with the World War II thing, and the next is Still Life by Sarah Winman. Now, this is going to be following two families and the way that their lives intersect during World War II era in, I believe, England. Yeah, two British families, so in England. I was so glad when this was submitted because this is a chunkster of a book and I own it on Kindle, and it's Forever Amber by Kathleen Winsor by Kathleen Winsor. And this is going to be about Amber St. Clair, who is a beautiful young woman who starts off in poverty and ends up rising in the ranks. I have heard that it is lush with historical facts and details, but also a little bit spicy. All right, now I'm back with this last little bit. So it's The Legend of Condor Heroes by Jin Young. This is this is 15 stories set in, I think, 3 or 4 volumes. It's going to be set in ancient China during the Song Dynasty, and it follows 2 legendary martial artists as they struggle against political turmoil and personal challenges. We are almost there. The next novel is Taiko, an epic novel of war and glory in feudal Japan by Aisha Yashikawa. And this is set in 16th century Japan following a peasant who ends up becoming a Japanese warlord. And it's going to be set in the Sengoku period of Japan's history. This next one I just bought, actually. I bought it and I hauled it in my latest haul video, and it is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafran. And this is going to be a bit magical, a bit romantic. It's supposed to be quite epic in scale, and it's the first in 4 books. I have had this book recommended to me so many times. It's set in post-World War II in Barcelona, and it's supposed to be about like a mysterious book that kicks everything off, which sounds perfect, especially for a book lover like me. And finally, last but definitely not least, a book that I have read, and it is Markus Zussek's The Book Thief, which again is set in World War II in Nazi Germany, and it's following this little girl and her life, and the narration is wonderful. It is about the people that she meets, the people that influence her life, and how she gets through Nazi-occupied Germany in that time period. It's a really incredible book. It's really incredible, and it's also about a little girl who loves books. I think it's touted as a sort of teen novel, but it's so good. Like, it's so good and so worth the read.
Mom,
They found me. I'll think about it. All right, well, that's it from me. If you have anything to add to this list, I would love to know. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye. And I actually watched it.
I can't get this.
The next book is The Game of King. Myth enters novel. I already said that.